markets at Nordex Group. Welcome, good morning. So, today's first panel is the shift towards industry, driving business competitiveness through renewable energy, energy's role in the economic growth by 2030. I think this panel is very important, as my former colleagues mentioned, and also Mrs. Roman. The importance of PPAs is growing, so an event that puts together both the industries and the producers and everything in between is more than welcomed, and it was about time to have something like that in Romania. I would like to start the panel with a question for all the panelists, and that is, how do you see the role of renewable energy in shaping the competitive landscape of industries in Europe? And I would like to invite Mrs. Bokşet to start, if possible.
Okay, so there was a lot of mention about the Draghi report this morning, and I think we have all read it. I will also mention that probably the ideas in the Draghi report were floating around. Some of those ideas have been in academia for decades, right? They are very much related to all the theories and the data that we have on green growth. Also at the national level, a report that we published, the Presidential Administration 2 years ago in 2022, was talking about an orderly green transition and an orderly process of decarbonization that is very much based on competitiveness and green growth. And what I would, suggest, and a holistic approach that we should take in this process of somehow managing at the same time to decarbonize our economies and enhance our competitiveness is to look at deployment. And many events related to energy in Romania are looking at deployment, but beyond actually developing projects in Romania, using green finance basically to develop generation capacity. Our approach should also involve the research and development of new technology side, also at the national level, not only globally, and also the manufacturing dimension of it. And this is something that we actually have supported the presidential administration, and there have been some steps taken in this regard at the governmental level. So currently, the government of Romania is working with the World Bank in the development of a Green Deal industrial plan for Romania. And they are looking at the decarbonization of very carbon-intensive sectors, and at the same time trying to be a bit more proactively to identify areas in which we could develop our manufacturing and development of green goods and services. Also, I think it's well worth looking at what certain countries have done at the EU level, even before the Draghi report. So France has actually published a green industrialization plan, and it's looking at that plan at different types of actually incentivizing green growth and incentivizing the manufacturing of green technologies. And next week at the informal European Council in Budapest, this topic of the Draghi report, decarbonization, green growth, will enter also the agenda of the heads of state and government. So this is a topic that we discussed at the technical level, but at the same time, it reached a stage where it's felt that there is a need for direction also from the European Council, and it's entering also that very high-level political dimension. As it was the case in the past when we talk about the green agenda, also with the EU-wide target of reaching carbon neutrality by 2050, and also the Fit for 55 ambitions and package. These were discussed also at the highest level at the European Council, and they were endorsed. And of course, as a second stage after that, we saw a set of policies and regulation at the European level that was transposed also at the national level. So we are to expect that after these discussions take place at the highest level, there will be also a reverberation at the more technical level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Afrik, could you answer the question next?
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you first of all, thank you for the invitation, and very happy to be here. Maybe I should be saying a few words about Business Europe, because maybe not all of you know about the organization. So Business Europe is the main European business organization in Brussels. I mean, we are cross industries. We represent business at large. We have member federations in all EU member states, leading employers, business organizations in all EU member states. And for Romania, Concordia, one of the partner organizations of today's event, is our member federation. So this is very brief about Business Europe. Now to your question. So I'll put it like this. What keeps us busy at night, as we say, is how we decarbonize Europe without deindustrialize Europe. This is really what keeps us busy at night. We have a full commitment for climate neutrality by 2050. This is a clear-cut commitment from Business Europe and our member federations. But we all know this is a very deep transformation and very challenging transformation. For everyone, for some, it's maybe even more difficult. If we think about long-term transport, if we think about some, as we call, hard-to-abate sectors, energy-intensive industries, they are really, also from a technological perspective, difficult challenges there. And for some of these sectors, things like energy cost, not as such, but in comparison with energy costs in the US, in China, is a real struggle and something that, in cases, and maybe the next speaker will elaborate on this, lead to some challenges on investment. So this is really what keeps us busy. And there is no easy solution, like always. You don't have the one magic solution to solve this challenging equation. You need to mobilize a range of measures. You need some right framework conditions applying for everyone. I think the point on research innovation is definitely an important one. But you also need sometimes very targeted measures. Not sure if we will discuss this a bit more during the panel today, but for some industries, energy-intensive industries, for instance, you have to think into so-called carbon leakage, investment leakage measures. You need to think about demand for the green technologies, for the green product, which often comes with a premium. We can talk about public funding, where you need them sometime, not always, but sometime, to de-risk some of the investment by the private sector. So you need a palette of instruments to be mobilized in a coordinated way. So that's elements where I'm coming from. And now I come really to your question, and I finish my first intervention with this. In all this landscape, it's crystal clear that electrification and renewables have to play a very central role. That's crystal clear. And I would like to illustrate my point with the publication. We recently published a study shortly before the summer. We spent a year with our membership looking into the European energy markets today and up to 2050. So we took with a consultant a long-term perspective until 2050. We look at two different models. As we always say, a business as usual and an optimist model. In the optimist model, we have a faster pace of decarbonization, stronger deployment of renewables, stronger rollout of energy efficient measures in key sectors. We have as well more interconnections than the business as usual model. And what the modeling shows, again, up to 2050, so a very long-term trajectory, is the evolution or the wholesale electricity price will be 40% cheaper in the optimist scenario, which basically means where you have more renewables, but also more renewables where it's the least cost to be deployed, wind, solar, and where you have a strong deployment of interconnection, so that the electricity which is produced the cheapest is then flowing through the European market. So 40% cheaper with stronger, faster renewables deployment in combination with strong deployment of interconnection for deeper integration of the European energy market. And then, on average, you will be more cheaper. So I think that's a good illustration, I hope, for the debate today, which really justifies the need for going strong on electrification and renewables. I think I'll leave it there for first round.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I give the floor to Mr. Manigrassi now. If you could also, at the beginning, mention a few words about the European aluminium, it would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. So when I started my job 5 years ago, the first thing I had to learn and say in every meeting was that primary aluminium is already fully electrified. We don't need hydrogen to electrify. The process is fully electrified. And electricity costs represent up to 40% of our production costs. So if the cost of electricity is too high, we simply produce elsewhere. And I was repeating this in every single meeting, and at one point I asked one of my more experienced members, why don't we speak to the power sector? I mean, if electricity is such a big problem, shouldn't we be talking to them? And I was quite shocked by the answer 5 years ago. It was, well, you know, our job is to produce aluminium. It's up to the power sector to decarbonize the grid. We wait and see, to have all the renewables in the system. And I was a bit surprised by this answer, and but I was new in the job, so I was like, okay, let's wait and see. 5 years fast forward, you have the COVID pandemic, the war in Ukraine, the energy crisis, 50% of EU27 primary aluminium capacity curtailed, and suddenly new legislation recognizing aluminium as a strategic metal for the energy transition and also as a strategic component for net zero technologies. And most importantly, my boss tells me, Manu, actually, do you want to go to Bucharest and talk about aluminium to the power sector? So I was, oh, that's great. It's the right time to do that. And the reason I'm telling you this story is basically to pass on 3 important messages and to answer your question. So the first thing is that aluminium needs power, and we need a lot of power. An average EU smelter consumes between 3 and 4 terawatt-hour per year. So for us, size matters a lot. Secondly, power needs aluminium. So if we want to be serious about the energy transition, we need to look at the sourcing of the aluminium. And by 2030, aluminium demand just for wind, solar, batteries, and cables is going to increase by 30%. And we produce it in Europe, and it is sustainable. The carbon footprint of European aluminium is half the one of the global average. And the third reason, which is really important for you, is that aluminium is strategic for Romania. Not too far from here, you have the biggest integrated, one of the biggest integrated aluminium producers in Europe, Alro, in Slatina, and they have an annual consumption of 360 megawatt per year. So that's a lot, and good luck in sourcing it only from wind and solar. So, and this production is base load. So I represent, and I'm answering also your second question, I represent all players across the value chain, from aluminum production, aluminium production, transformation, recycling, and in Romania you have all of this. So what we need, and I'm building on what you just said, is first of all, tailor-made solutions for electro-intensive and energy-intensive industries. Because if those that are already electrified cannot stay in Europe because the cost is too high, then we cannot go out there and say electrification is the solution for everything. We need to first look at keeping existing electrified sectors in Europe. Not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because if they close, it's lost revenues for the power sector. As simple as that. And the second reason is that we need to look at the material dimension of the energy transition. In Brussels at the moment, there's a big focus on competitiveness, just seen as the technologies needed to decarbonize, wind, solar, storage, but we forget about the material that we need to produce them. And that is why it's important that aluminium is produced in Europe. We still have it, and we should build more in building a more resilient value chain in Europe. On the solutions, I stop here, and I'm sure we'll come to them in a bit. And thank you.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to Mr. Dwenger to present us his perspective.
Yeah, also thanks from my end for the invitation and to be here today with you and sitting here on the panel. First, maybe a few words to myself. So I'm heading the operations of the Nordics Group in Eastern Europe. Nordics is #1 offshore wind for new installations since 2 years in Europe. Really big milestone for us. The corporate has 10,000 employees, and we are turning over 7 billion euro a year in onshore wind. So really a big corporate in the onshore wind. We are producing state-of-the-art wind turbine technology, and of course we are interested to be a market player here in Romania. We see good developments, and we wish all the best for the upcoming CFD round, and let's see how many projects will find an off-take option. Now to your subject, Andina. Very broad question, I have to say. Very humble contribution from me as a representative of one of the equipment maker for the renewable energy. I mean, energy is in every product and in every service we are using or we are consuming. And if we were not aware of that since the energy crisis, I think everybody has opened his eyes, because the energy increase or the price increase of energy terminated in a wide inflation spread over whole Europe, which was energy price driven. And I think since then, latest, we all know that energy matters a lot. Cheap energy keeps inflation low, and cheap energy is important depending on how intensive the consumption of energy is for the production, keeps the production of products competitive. Yes, solar and wind, and we heard that, and I think most of us most of you share this opinion that renewable energies like wind and solar, they are the most competitive generators of electrical energy today. Nevertheless, it stays an intermittent energy, so we can't produce when you need the supply. We produce when the wind is blowing and when the sun is shining. By the way, also with clouded skies, solar is working, so there's no doubt about that. But it's intermittent, so we need something to make the trick that the energy is still coming out of the socket when there's no renewable energy. And that can be gas power plant, it can be hydro, but for example, the combination of nuclear and renewable doesn't work very well. There's a big problem in France, for example. So I think this should be said. So for me, the bridge solution before we can enter into the real hydrogen world, which is painted very pinky for the future, is something which has to do with gas reserve capacity power plants, etc., in order to really build out further the renewables. Well, of course, my company has a big interest in. Storage can also, battery storage can also contribute to a certain extent, but for sure not for longer periods of low winds, if we would see that over all Europe. But on the other side, cheap energy, is it sufficient to be competitive and to have in Europe landscape of competitive industry production places? Of course it's not, and then it's depending on how energy intensive the industry is. If I look at some corporates like BASF in Germany, which is in the chemical sector, heavily affected by gas prices going up in Germany, not having really a substitute for it on the same price level. They are clearly going to invest outside Europe in order to produce still on a competitive basis their chemical products. On the other side, there are sectors like automotive, chip industry, what you say, where energy is also an input, but it's not the main driver of it. So to the question, what is more needed? It's not only cheap energy, which will keep us having high added values in the European community. We need skilled labor at the right cost. We need less bureaucracy, and this is, I think, all over the place. For me, wrong competition, who can do more bureaucracy in the countries of the European community or Brussels itself, also does not really help. We need sufficient drivers for innovation and investment in Europe, more digitalization, and of course we need to invest into the infrastructure. We need excellent infrastructure. If we keep all this together with the right frame, we will be able to compete against, let's say, Asia and North America, to name the two big blocks we are having geostrategically competition with. And yeah, I think this is what I wanted to contribute from my end for the first question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just to summarize some key points, I understand that decarbonization is not cheap. My personal opinion is that we should see it as an investment, not necessarily as a cost, but still it's a cost attached to it. Energy-intensive industries need cheaper energy. And I also heard, I think for the second time, I also heard Mrs. Roman mention the bureaucracy and less bureaucracy. So my next question for Mrs. Bokse was, what do you see as the main challenges? I already mentioned a couple of them, if you have something to add on this. And what, in your opinion, should be prioritized to ensure a sustainable economic growth?
Thank you. I think it's very interesting what you mentioned, that we should look at decarbonization as an investment, and of course there are costs attached to every investment. And I'm very much aware that this event, it's an event on basically mitigating climate change. But when we talk about climate change, we talk also about the cost of adaptation. And if we don't do enough on mitigation, on decarbonizing our energy systems, because in the process of decarbonizing our energy system is very important. We can talk also about the decarbonization of agriculture, for instance, but this is not the subject of this discussion. But if we don't decarbonize our societies, our economies, and if we stay on a trajectory of increasing the global temperature with 3-4 degrees Celsius by the end of this century, as reflected by the recently published UN report, the costs of adaptation are going to be very high. And the cost of adaptations will be paid by communities, but they will be paid also by industries, because including the integrity of our energy systems is going to be at high risk in a scenario where we have an increase of temperature for 5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. Now, when it comes to challenges and things that we still need to get in order to have a smooth transition and a smooth decarbonization, I want to bring into discussion, and there were some great ideas here about things we need to do and potential areas of challenge. I just want to highlight that we also need to look at our human resource for the green transition and for basically skilling our human resource for the green transition and the energy transition. And I am aware that we do have in this room people that have been, companies that have been directly involved in actually making sure that they do prepare technical staff and administrative staff for the green transition. So in addition to yes, we could look also at available finance. That might be also a challenge, and how we use, for instance, EU funds to unlock additional finance. This is something that we need to additionally work on in Romania, because we have been quite good in using grants, but we haven't always used very wisely the grant element and EU funding to unlock complementary funding from multilateral development banks, from commercial banks, for instance. And then there is the issue of skills, because we have talked about electrification here, we have talked about renewables, we have talked about networks, but investments actually in networks, in new generation projects, are very much based on engineer and skilled people. And if we look at different projects that we have in Romania, we see that we are very much behind, because we don't always have the skilled workforce to implement these projects. And then I think also reducing basically the paperwork and the red tape that comes associated with different projects, creating, one-stop shops for different, for the certification process, establishing go-to areas for renewable energy projects, in particular to guide investors towards areas that might not be of strategic interest for agriculture, or they might not basically come with additional obligations on environmental protection. So I would leave it at these 3 areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yes, also the area of skills is something that in Romania we have heard about in several sectors, if not almost in all sectors. Thank you very much. Mr. Afre, could you also share your experience and good practice from the EU level initiatives?
Yeah, with pleasure. Maybe before, I think, speaking about European, the use of European funding, if I'm not mistaken, I read this a couple of days ago. I think Romania is one of the few member states, industrialized member states with Bulgaria and Czech Republic, which has not used fund from the Innovation Fund. which is under the EU ETS. There is more and more fund being available there. So from industrialized countries, so Romania, Bulgaria, Czech Republic are the three left which have not been using the money available there. So I think, yeah, it's certainly something to be explored. And then, again, before answering your question, I think I also agree this is not just a cost, this is an investment, this is all the discussion about how we manage the short-term agenda, where a lot of industries are under very strong global competition, so how you deal with the short-term cost. But then, of course, this is as well an investment for the future. Investment in research innovation today brings you the competitiveness of tomorrow. I think all these elements are crystal clear. And also, its competitiveness is not just about energy cost. I agree with this as well. Skills, bureaucracy, we are the first one to challenge the European Commission in Brussels from time to time about too much bureaucracy, and many other elements have been mentioned. But yes, there is a reality if we compare situation in Europe, and there are a lot of explanations and good explanations for this, but if you compare the situation of Europe on average today and compare with the US and China, main competitors on global markets, we have a deficit, we have an energy cost differential, which has basically increased even post-energy crisis. So that's, I'm not saying this is the only thing that needs to be tackled to become more competitive, but this is something we cannot of course ignore and work on to try improve the situation where we can. So I think this is really to put this in that perspective. Now to your question, experiences from Brussels. I think I will mention one thing which I haven't heard. I was not here yesterday, but I haven't heard yet from the discussion this morning, is about permitting. So go-to areas has been mentioned. So prioritized areas for the deployment of renewables. I think, yeah, with the Renewables Directive, emergency measures, emergency regulation from the energy crisis as well, a lot has been done. And sometimes we think Brussels is too slow. I think with the energy crisis, we have seen Brussels and the EU being able to act quite fast. Sometimes positive, like around permitting, sometimes more challenging from our perspective, but Europe has been able to act fast, and that is good. So yeah, permitting, I think I'm not saying this is yet a perfect situation, but can be seen as maybe the beginning of a success story where Europe brings quite strong added value. There is an ongoing study about implementation by member states on permitting in the renewable sectors, and it shows that two-thirds of the member states have now taken more measures to clarify and define deadlines for the permitting, which is again not the silver bullet, but shows there is a dynamic and a movement to do things much better. And in a country like Germany, they have improved between 6. So permitting decisions are taken between 6 months and 12 months faster than before. And this is driven to a large extent by measures and decisions being taken at EU level, which I think is of course also nationally and local, but there is some incentive and strong framework from the European level there. I think that's a quite recent and positive example and lessons we can take from the EU level.
Thank you for that. Indeed, also from my experience, this is the starting point, the starting bottleneck that I hear when discussing with the developers. Romania has made some progress in the last 2 years on this front, but more progress is always welcomed. Thank you for that. I heard a lot of good points already, but can I ask you, Mr. Manigrasi, if you could share some good practice or some lessons learned from other countries from the industry side?
Yes, absolutely. And yesterday, in the welcoming address of the Swedish ambassador, it was very interesting to hear that she was comparing the Romanian energy mix with the Swedish energy mix by saying that Sweden used to have mainly nuclear and hydro, and with time they increased the share of renewables, and that Romania is in a similar situation. It's transitioning, and as soon as these renewables come online, the cost will go down. So the reason I'm telling you this is that often when we look at the best practices in signing long-term contracts in Europe, we look at the Nordics. And PPAs have been mainly signed in Norway, Iceland, and Sweden. And the reason is because of the physical conditions of the power mix. They have abundant hydropower and they have a lot of wind. So this basically brings down the energy component of the cost of producing energy. And they also worked a lot on reducing the regulatory component of the energy price, of the electricity price. And I'm saying this because if you're a smelter and a tiny increase of euro per megawatt hour in your consumption affects your decision, then any extra charge, be it CFD scheme, grid charges, capacity mechanisms, they will impact your decision on producing in Europe. And other important elements is the fact that as a base load consumer, you need to address the shaping cost, which is what you were saying. And we don't have enough renewables in the system to basically balance it out because we are base load consumers. So in the Nordics, they have lower balancing costs because they can shape it with nuclear and hydro. But if you move here, the challenge is different. And that is why it's very difficult at the moment in Romania to sign a PPA for big electro-intensive consumers. And the third, let's say, best practice is guarantee schemes. These are schemes aimed to reduce the risk in the transaction. We have schemes mainly in Norway, France, and Spain. The EIB is currently working on an EIB product, EIB guarantee scheme, to facilitate the uptake of these of PPAs. And maybe finally, it's not necessarily the best practice, but it is a tool that is there and is very important for the aluminum industry, is ETS, indirect cost compensation, which is basically under national state aid. And you have still in the EU primary aluminum production only where you have ETS, indirect cost compensation. Otherwise, a smelter is not producing in that country. So it is important that EU member states make full use of ETS in their cost compensation. According to the state aid guidelines, you can use up to 25% of ETS revenues to compensate. And this is not just a state subsidy. It has clear conditionality requirements, and it has also a cap. So it's not just aid that you give out. So to summarize, remove the barriers to PPAs and make full use of the tools under EU state aid law.
Thank you. And now, moving forward. So from everything we heard today, we basically need to start deploying more renewables. And could you explain us a bit more, again, lessons learned or good practices of other countries that deployed wind in your case faster?
I would start with an example which is not wind, so not biased today. I think already 7-8 years ago, I looked the first time into hybrid models, so to combine wind, solar, batteries, etc. And then you came very early across that in California, Sun Ridge, the government had incentivized the actors, so developers and sponsors, to put solar plants. And very easily they saw, hell, solar is totally predictable and the peak is at 12 every day. So do we now streamline all industry peaking consumption at 12, or what do we do? So they said from a certain stage onwards, we can't allow additional installations for solar plants because there's no demand at those peak hours, only with the condition that you put storage. This was as I said, almost 10 years ago. And then what is really striking me is that in Europe, country by country, we are making the same experience. So we do not learn and do it proactively. We saw it coming in Spain, we saw it in Italy. Recently, I have also observed it in the Baltics. So suddenly, then the governments need to change their ideas about how to add more renewables, and then allowing for whenever you want to install a solar plant, you need also to install a wind farm, because solar and wind together are completing each other in many places very well. Then you have a higher capacity factor on the grid connection point, and the overall use of the grid is much better. Good practices. I think good practice, when we look at the electrical vehicle, it's fine when you try to start the market with subsidizing electric vehicle purchase. But if there's no infrastructure for charging, it doesn't work. So you need first to look at the charging infrastructure, and then you can create a market for it. I think this was also not respected in some of the countries, also not in Germany. I think a good example was, I don't know if I like it from all perspectives, but Tesla went big time in the US along all the highways, installed the superchargers. So they thought about it, they got the political support for it, and you found excellent charging system, which motivated a lot of people to go electrical driving, as a good example. In general, I mean, what is needed, what are the good examples? I think we should really look at it from the perspective, every kilowatt hour produced from the renewable generation should be supported, is needed, makes sense. There's no issue with consuming the energy. So it's very recommendable that the permitting is streamlined on one side. So you already mentioned it in Germany. Wonder that country was able to reduce bureaucracy and to streamline the permitting process. In Germany, we are now ready to go for 8 gigawatt onshore wind permitting every year, and also installation. 8 gigawatt per year, which is quite a big number. So whatever is possible, let people apply for permit and generate. Then we need the grid infrastructure to improve all the time, and this we need also thinking country internationally, not only internally. And good examples are older projects where we have the electricity coming into Germany from Norway. We have nowadays projects from Norway connecting to UK connecting back to Netherlands, so that we get the grid capacity better used. Wherever you have high production of renewables, you have the best way of dealing with it, and that it's consuming instantly at the same time everywhere where it's needed. And there are more projects to come. We need that. Romania has a good potential for renewables. It's untapped. Ukraine, neighboring country, much more, hopefully soon without this war situation. Then we need interconnection with Germany, who is switching off coal-fired plants by 2035. Nuclear is already switched off. Open supply channels. The Baltics are thinking of doing a cable from Baltic to Germany, but they have still not done it because they are fearing that the electricity price in Baltics will go up, because the electricity is so much more expensive in Germany than in the Baltics. So these are blockers. We need to look at that, and we really need, and Giles also made that point, we need really to think that the incentives are put in a way that we achieve what we want to achieve, and we are not doing that consequently. Thank you.
Thank you very much for basically summarizing most of the discussions on the key points. I do believe we have some time for questions, maybe 2 free questions if anybody wants to address something to the panelists. Okay, it seemed that everything was very clear. That's always a good sign. Thank you very, very much for taking the time to be at the conference with us today. And I would like to take the opportunity and introduce Mihnea Cătuț, who is the head of research at Energy Policy Group. And yeah, thank you very much.